Before we work on interpreting diagrams, let's go ahead and make sure we can draw one of our own. For a seasons diagram, we need to locate the sun directly in the middle because you must have a sun, the sun, in order to have the seasons. Then we're going to draw the earth in 4 locations around the sun. The next thing that we're going to need to include is the Earth's axis. Remember that the Earth is tilted on its axis, so instead of being straight up and down, the Earth is actually tilted on its axis at an angle of about 23.5 degrees. The reason you're going to see me drawing the axis, there we go, like this, instead of the way we've been doing it in class like this, is because I've had several students getting the equator and the axis kind of mixed up. So for today's example, we're going to be drawing the equator with a dotted line and the axis, the North and South Pole, with a solid line that doesn't go all the way through planet Earth. I think that'll make it a little bit easier for you guys. So I'm going to go ahead and add this. You can tilt the equator to the left or to the right in your diagram. Either way is acceptable. Just make sure that all 4 Earths have the axis tilted the same direction in each diagram. So for example, this would be okay. Or if we wanted to, we could actually have the axis tilted the opposite direction, as long as these are always consistent. So after that, now we're going to go through and we're going to add the equator to each one of these. And our next step is going to be to add an N and an S for the North and South Pole to separate the Northern Hemisphere from the Southern Hemisphere. So on each one of these, if this isn't added, this is a really good visual for really seeing the tilt of each hemisphere. The final thing that we're going to have to add is our directional arrows to show the orbit. It is perfectly acceptable to draw directional arrows going counterclockwise, or that's clockwise, sorry, going clockwise, or you can draw them going counterclockwise. It really doesn't matter which direction we draw them in. So I'm just going to pick a direction, after I hold my paper down, pick a direction and draw those arrows in that direction. So now we are finished drawing our seasons diagram and we are ready to label the seasons. So the first thing, there are 2 things that you guys got to remember as far as seasons diagrams go. I guess there's actually 3, so let's talk about all 3. The very first thing is be very careful about your question. Make sure you know if it's asking for a season in the Northern Hemisphere or the Southern Hemisphere. This is going to completely change your answer because remember, the seasons are completely opposite in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. For example, if the Northern Hemisphere was in winter, then the Southern Hemisphere during that exact same day would be experiencing summer. And we'll look to see how here in just a moment. So the first thing you got to know is the question asking about the Northern Hemisphere or the Southern Hemisphere? The second question that you got to look at is if it asks you if something is fall or spring, we are not going to be able to look at our diagram and just be like, yep, that's at fall, or, oh, yep, that's at spring, or that's spring, because these actually can't be located until you have found something else first. So first and foremost, before you do anything else on a seasons diagram, you will need to locate where we find summer. Sorry about the blurry cam there. Let me go ahead and write this, and then I will come back to it. And winter. So on a seasons diagram, you have to find summer and winter first. And the good news is, always, always, always on a seasons diagram, at least the simple ones, you're going to find summer and winter on the sides, on the left and the right of the diagram. Now be careful. Sometimes summer will be on the left of the diagram. Sometimes summer will be on the right of the diagram. It all depends on which way the arrows are going and which way the axis is tilting as to where your seasons will actually fall. But no matter what, on a simple diagram, you'll find summer and winter on the sides. So now we're ready. I'm going to go ahead and label these location A. Let's do B up here, C down here, and D right here. I'm doing those out of order on purpose. So you guys don't just follow the order of the letters, but you follow the arrows instead. Okay, so very briefly, what we need to do next is look at, I would say letter C and letter B. This is where I see a lot of misconception, whereas if you look right here, I'm like, okay, remember, in the summer, we have direct sunlight. The Northern Hemisphere is tilted closest to the sun, or whichever hemisphere you're looking at is closest to the sun, direct sunlight. So a lot of students are like, oh, yep, look right here. The Northern Hemisphere is the closest to the sun. But remember, our most important thing you got to know about diagrams is that summer and winter can only ever be found on the sides. So then what's going on in letter C if it's not the closest to the sun? in real life, this diagram is flawed because we know that in real life, the Earth goes around the sun from the side to being in front of the sun, to the side of the sun, to being behind the sun. In this diagram, it looks like the Earth, instead of going around the sun and popping out of the page towards us, it looks like it's going underneath the sun and then above the sun. We're really glad that doesn't happen, though, because if that happened, we'd be melting. If this was summer, we would be pointing our North Pole and our ice. Oops, sorry, got cut off there. Okay, so we were just looking right here. We were saying that this can't be summer in the Northern Hemisphere because in real life, if that was under the sun, the Northern Hemisphere was tilted or pointing. That's not even tilted at the sun. That's pointing at the sun. Then you're melting all of the polar ice caps. You're going to flood the whole world. It's just a disaster. So in real life, this doesn't go under the sun. It comes in front of the sun. If it comes in front of the sun, then the Northern Hemisphere is randomly tilting up and the Southern Hemisphere is randomly tilting down. Neither one is actually tilted toward the sun at all. So remember, summer and winter will always be on the sides of your diagram. Spring and fall will always be above and below. My students remember spring up, fall down. That means that spring won't always be up and fall won't always be down, but the two will always be up or down. So spring could be down here, fall could be up here. Okay, so let's start labeling here. Let's go ahead and look at our sides because it looks like we have to find summer and winter before we can do fall and spring anyway. And they're going to be on the sides. So pick a side, any side. Let's start with letter A simply because that's in alphabetical order. So at letter A, we look at the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere, and we try to decide where's direct sunlight shining. If we draw a line from the sun to the Earth here, directly, you'll see that the sun is shining directly on the Southern Hemisphere. That's because planet Earth has been tilted on its axis so that, well, it is already tilted on its axis, so that it's tilted toward the sun. So they get the most direct sunlight, which would put the Southern Hemisphere at this time in the season of summer. However, the Northern Hemisphere, as it spins around once every 24 hours, it just barely gets the sun's energy. The rays are kind of glancing off. So we end up in winter. So if you look at the Northern Hemisphere, whenever the Northern Hemisphere is tilted away from the sun, that's when we experience winter, if you guys see. Another student said, I have a hard time telling if it's tilted away or toward, but if you draw the N and the S, you can really see how the S, the Southern Hemisphere, is closer to the sun, and the Northern Hemisphere is farther away from the sun. Okay, so now we're going to follow our arrows and go ahead and do our seasons. You could go ahead and come over here and label this season as well, but let's go ahead and follow them around in order. If I just looked at this and I was like, hey, is the Northern Hemisphere in spring or fall? You wouldn't be able to tell if it was this one or if it was this one because they look identical, right? So we're going to have to find the sides and then follow the arrows to figure out what's going on down here. So we're just going to follow our seasons in order. So in winter, we're really cold. We go on, well, okay, in Texas, sort of. We go on Christmas vacation. We come back in the Northern Hemisphere, and then eventually we're going to go on spring break. So this would be spring in the Northern Hemisphere. Let's just go ahead and follow the Northern Hemisphere all the way around, and we'll come back and do the Southern Hemisphere. So after spring, things start to warm up. Eventually, you're going to go on summer vacation. So we're going to label this one right here, summer. If we draw a line directly from the sun to the Earth in this one, you'll see that the most direct sunlight is now hitting the northern half of the globe because it is tilted toward the sun. So that in the Northern Hemisphere, it's summer because we are now tilted toward the sun. After summer, things cool back down. We go back to school. And so we end up in fall. After fall comes winter. So now we can go around and do the same thing for our Southern Hemisphere. We're going to follow the same order of the seasons, but they're going to be opposite the Northern Hemisphere. So after summer, things cool back down and they go back to school. So fall would occur right here for them. After fall, things get really cold and we end up in winter. Now, if you guys look at the globe here, you can see how the Southern Hemisphere is tilted away from the sun. Northern Hemisphere is closer, Southern Hemisphere is farther. So that puts that in winter. After winter, things warm back up again. Wildflowers bloom, at least in Texas. So in the Southern Hemisphere, that would actually be spring. So there's our seasons diagram. I'm actually going to, instead of going through these with you guys, I'm going to post these up on our website. I want you guys to kind of run through them on your own. There's 2 different examples. Scroll down the page and then you can see how you did with the labels. I'll put the answers on page 2. If you guys are still having any questions or any struggles on this, I will be here in tutorials Monday morning. See you guys later. That's a wrap.